It's important to understand what a contingency is when you're buying or selling real estate. What does it mean and what are the most common ones we see? Well, let's talk about it. Hey everyone, Elias Acuna here at HeSellsHouses. And today we're actually talking about real estate contingencies. What is that? A contingency is actually a clause in real estate that it gives the parties a right to cancel or back out if a certain condition hasn't been met. There are some common contingencies that we see, and there are some other unusual ones that we have seen depending on what the market is. And today we're actually going to go ahead and talk about some of the differences you might see for buyers, for sellers, and again, what you might see based on the actual market. So let's go ahead and start with buyers. Most contingencies that we see in offers are actually put there because of buyers, not necessarily sellers. So we'll go ahead and start with that. Now, there are some common ones that you'll see pretty much in any contract, or I should say most contracts. And those standard basic contingencies that we typically see are things like an inspection contingency, financing contingency. These are things that buyers are going to need to make sure that have been satisfied before they can purchase the property. Obviously, a buyer purchasing anything unless they're doing an as-is sale, waiving inspections, they're going to want an opportunity to do inspections on the house to make sure that they're satisfied with the overall condition. Obviously, when you're going to make an offer on a house, you're assuming the best, but during your inspections, you find out what the reality of the situation is, and then from there, the buyer has the right, again, to either back out or try to renegotiate if there is an inspection contingency. Now, once you're past that inspection contingency, typically we have a financing contingency. Now, as part of that, there may be an appraisal contingency in there, essentially saying that the property has to appraise at or above the purchase price, though that is negotiable. But typically, your financing contingency is going to cover you in the event that you're unable to obtain financing by the expiration of that, mortgage contingency date or that financing contingency date. Now, you may or may not be covered with an appraisal as part of that mortgage contingency date, so obviously it's important to understand exactly how that's worded in your contract. But typically, again, as long as you've applied and you've done everything that the bank has asked you to do and you're just unable to get a secure loan by the time your financing contingency is up, you can either cancel or request for additional time in order to get the mortgage completed. Some of the other ones that we commonly see with buyers are things related to grant funds. Let's say a buyer is applying for some sort of grant or assistance program. There may be a contingencies added to the contract to make sure that they can secure those funds in order to close on the property. Also, you may have a contingency, something along the lines of contingent upon seeing the entire property, especially in today's market. It's so crazy getting in and out of home. Sometimes you're limited in terms of what you can actually see. So a buyer may have a contingency just to verify they can actually go through the entire property. This is actually something that's pretty common with multifamily buyers. They may be putting a contingency to view all of the units. Sometimes when you're selling a multifamily house, it's just, in terms of scheduling, it's just tough to get into all of the units at once before making an offer. So again, it is common to see, a contingency upon viewing the entire property. In addition to that type of contingency with multifamilies, a lot of times we see buyers putting contingencies asking for things like, payment history from the tenant, contingent upon the buyer's satisfactory review of lease information, verification of security and, last month's rent, things along those lines that the buyer just wants to make sure are in place or that they're satisfied with before, again, they move forward with the purchase. Another one that we see for buyers is a contingency to sell a property. If you're in a position where you need to sell something and use those proceeds in order to make a purchase, then you really need to make sure that you have a contingency to sell your property in order to close on the house that you're actually buying. Now, there's a couple of other things with that when you're buying and selling at the same time. You could all add a contingency to make sure that the closings are going to happen at the same day concurrently, and that way you have a little bit less stress with finding a temporary temporary housing or something along those lines. But as with anything in real estate, all of this is negotiable, and it's going to be important that you talk to your real estate agent to make sure that you're adding in the proper protections for your actual personal situation. So now that we've talked about some of the common contingencies that we see with buyers, we're going to go ahead and talk about sellers now. There's typically not as many things that the sellers are adding in terms of contingencies, but there are a few things that we see a lot of times, and especially in today's market. We actually a lot of times see a contingency for the seller to find suitable housing. Now that basically means those people are usually trying to purchase a property. Perhaps they'll do some sort of rental, or they just need to secure housing, short term somewhere else. But usually it means that they're looking to make some sort of purchase. So it's important for the buyer to understand that contingency is in there. And obviously that seller wants to make sure that they've got that contingency to protect themselves in the event that they can't find a place to go, that they don't actually have to sell and then essentially be out on the street. So a couple of other things that we sometimes see with a seller in terms of contingencies, with investment properties, a lot of times we'll see a seller add something along the lines of the buyer helping them participate with something like a 1031 exchange, or we even see in the case of an estate sale where there's no will, perhaps a license to sell needs to be obtained, so the seller may have a contingency, contingent upon them being able to obtain a license to sell, so that the sale actually can go ahead and close. Now, depending on whether or not the market is favoring buyers or sellers, some of these contingencies may actually vary, and you may even see situations where buyers are waiving certain contingencies, or sellers are looking for offers that are waiving certain contingencies, like an inspection contingency, an appraisal contingency, things along those lines. They're looking to basically try to get themselves in a situation where they're getting the best buyer with the least amount of possible obstacles to close. Now, on the other end of that, in a buyer's market, I've seen situations where sellers will accept pretty much any contingency that's added to the contract because they're just looking for someone to purchase the home. Now, some of the more uncommon things that I have seen in the past are things like contingent upon a job transfer. Perhaps a buyer is looking to purchase a certain property, but they need to make sure that they obtain a particular job before they'll close on it. Also, I've seen things like a contingent upon purchasing another property along with this, especially if you're doing some sort of investment package deal. Perhaps the investor only wants to acquire this property in the event they're actually acquiring another specific parcel. Also, contingent upon something like receiving gift funds. Even though we talked about that contingency for grants, gifts is another thing that we see a lot of times, and we sometimes see contingencies added in there where a buyer maybe is unsure whether or not they're going to be able to obtain that gift, and they just want to make sure that they can cancel the contract in the event that they're unable to actually get it. Now, again, this really is dependent upon what type of market it is. When we're dealing with the buyer's market, obviously we're going to be able to do a lot more things that will be favor the buyer in terms of contingencies. Right now, we've been in really a strong seller's market, so it really does hurt buyers to add extra contingencies that aren't really necessary, or that the seller feels maybe put the buyer in the least favorable position. So it's going to be important to talk to your real estate agent to make sure that you're setting up your offer in the best way, that again, adding the contingencies that you absolutely need to protect yourself, but also again, making yourself an attractive buyer, when you're going to go ahead and make that offer. So these are just a few of the contingencies that we see a lot, and some of the uncommon ones that I have seen before in the past. But this doesn't mean that this is every contingency that could possibly be out there. There are certainly unique situations that may be unique just to you as a buyer or a seller that maybe agents or other people haven't really seen before. But essentially everything in real estate is negotiable. So if there's anything that you can think of that you'd like to add to the deal in order to protect yourself, you can certainly go ahead and try to do that. But again, it's going to be important to have those conversations with your real estate agent to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success. Well, hopefully you found this information valuable. As usual, you can go ahead and schedule a call with me on my website, HeSellsHouses.com, or feel free to text me anytime, 413-626-4097, and I look forward to helping you out with all your real estate needs.